Hey, gang, I'm here to finish this off. The original plan was to have a list from myself, from Kristine, my girlfriend, and from Tyler Foster, but this has gone on too long already, so we'll have Kristine and Tyler talk about their choices next time we record something else. So what follows is the rest of Patrick's list, the entirety of Betsy Jorgensen's list, and then parts of my list that were movies that Patrick had already seen and wanted to talk about. I'll include my complete list as a link somewhere, but I would want to give a special shout out to a couple movies we don't cover, including Troll Hunter, Housebound, We Are Still Here, Tigers Are Not Afraid, Knife Plus Heart, One Cut of the Dead, and especially Annihilation.
Get Out, we already talked about. That was my number 7.
Yep.
The Witch, I think, is probably on a lot of other people's lists.
Yeah, it did end up being on a lot of lists. And we talked about it a little at the beginning anyway.
Yeah, so I'll talk about another film by that director that I'm a little bit more of a fan of, but
yeah,
considering how much I like The Witch, I would never expect the follow-up to be a drastic improvement, but I kind of think it is.
Yeah.
My number 5 film, it's a movie that sort of came out 2019. It's called In Fabric. It's a Peter Strickland movie from the director of Duke of Burgundy and Barbarian Sound Studio. It's funny. I just recorded the top films of 2019 episode of Directors Club, and I found it really hard to describe this movie, both because I've only seen it the one time at the film festival. I saw it at the beginning of 2019, and it's so unusual. Mm-hmm. It's so hard to describe because it almost starts out, you think it's like Rubber, because it's a haunted object, like killer object movie, and it's an object that you would never expect to be moving around and killing people. Instead of a car tire, it's a beautiful red dress. But it has a surprising emotional commitment. Not surprising if you've seen Peter Strickland's other films, but surprising for the log line of a killer dress literally like slinks around and kills people.
Yeah.
You will really get invested in these characters, and it really cares about sort of their sadness and the ways they try to fill this sadness and sort of the way they feel stuck in their jobs. And it is definitely a satire of consumerism.
It's a brutal satire of consumerism. It is it scares the shit out of it in a great way. I loved it.
Yeah. It sort of other than a killer dress, sort of the central joke is that there is a department store that is basically like a coven of witches, like something out of Suspiria or something. And
it's almost beyond that. It's like it's actual, like it's hell.
Yes,
it's almost like it's literal hell.
It's as if capitalism itself was just sort of this thing that radiated out of hell, which is the stores that you pass every day on the street here on Earth. And everyone,
but because it's Peter Strickland, it's not like a modern Walmart. It's like a mid-60s Sears.
No, we haven't.
Not even Sears, like Penny's.
We haven't really talked about this with Peter Strickland, but Peter Strickland and a lot of filmmakers of this era are fetishists of specifically 70s Euro cult films, both sort of sexploitation and horror and giallo films of this sort. Nicholas Winding Refn, obviously another one. The filmmaking couple who made Strange Color of Your Body's Tears and Amir and Let the Corpses Tan is another.
Yeah.
But Peter Strickland is the only one who has a sense of humor, and he has a great sense of humor. Duke of Burgundy had some very funny moments, despite it not in a taking the piss. Like he
no, it's character based stuff. It's like it's the reality in the surreal surroundings.
So everyone in this department store, they speak this hilarious mix of like prophecy / corporate jargon, like double speak. One of the awards we did on the best of 2019 episode of Directors Club was best line of dialogue, and mine was from In Fabric, and I got to pull it up real quick, but it's the hesitation in your voice, soon to be an echo in the recesses of the sphere of retail. It's a lot of that sort of thing. I called it Peter Strickland's Mike Judge movie. It kind of feels like if you were going to make an Italian obsessed horror movie that is also Office Space.
Yeah.
But then So once you get a sort of handle on what its targets are and what its aesthetic influences are and all of that, then it structurally pulls the rug out from under you in a way that I still haven't really wrapped my head around because I only saw it the one time, where it totally changes protagonists. It is such a strange movie, but
it starts to feel like it's going to be a portmanteau kind of anthology thing, but it's not.
No, it happens too late in the movie for that to happen more than one time. So it is such a beautiful film. It is such a funny film. It is such a warm and human film. It is such a biting satirical film. It actually has legitimately scary moments, like the dress sort of slinking around or floating over someone's bed. The slinking around not so scary. The floating over the bed a little bit haunting. But there's a nightmare sequence or two that is genuinely frightening. Frightening use of mannequins, but also hilarious use of mannequins.
There's a scene that is it's a sort of almost parody of scenes that happen in Jess Franco's Vampiros Lesbos.
Oh yeah,
where there's a woman who does sort of stage performance where she fakes having sex with a mannequin and so there's this really long mannequin sex sequence in this movie.
That's funny. That's another thing that with Peter Strickland movies is it's sort of like how I feel watching Quentin Tarantino movies, where there are certain people who call Quentin Tarantino a ripoff, but because I'm not as familiar with the films that he's referencing, like when he steals a shot or whatever, I never notice. So I just think, he's just a very good filmmaker. And I do think he is a very good filmmaker, even if he knows how to take idea or visual idea or two. So there are things in this movie and in Duke of Burgundy, which is one of my absolute favorite movies of the decade, horror or otherwise, that I watch and I go, there's probably a point of reference here that I'm just not getting.
He does a beautiful thing where there is a point of reference, but it really does feel like his own. It's like his movie is an actual artifact of the era that he is mimicking.
But also, it's not just that he loves these movies and wants to make one. It's that he sees the potential in these movies.
Yeah.
Not in I'm going to elevate what is just a common cheap B movie into something that is true art approach, but in this is what I see when I watch these movies. These are the kind of things that I obsess over when I watch these movies, and I want everyone to see them, and I'm going to just slightly expand it. Honestly, Peter Strickland is the top three most compelling filmmakers of this decade. I can't wait to see what he does next. I can't wait to watch In Fabric again. I'm just so enamored with all the choices he makes. He is the full package, and he is not one of those auteurs that is talked about in hushed tones the way an Ari Aster is or something, who is, to cite a recent sort of breakthrough director. He's never had a movie that really broke through the public consciousness. Both Duke of Burgundy and Barbarian Sound Studio are on Hulu, so they're there to watch, and you should watch them if you haven't seen them. In Fabric,
yeah, Duke of Burgundy at least got a Blu-ray release right off the bat.
Yes.
That's the one.
Yes. So in Fabric, it was released by A24, which is sort of the big mini major studio that has a lot of crossover hits. They released Midsummer. They released It Follows. They released Hereditary. 99%. They did release Hereditary. So I saw this at a film festival and I thought, oh, this is going to be the one. And then A24 totally buried it.
Yeah. It sucks.
Yeah. They buried it the same way they buried Under the Silver Lake. They just fucking dumped this. And it really bums me out because I think it's a spectacular movie.
And I think everyone's like, you can't sell this movie. Yes, you can. It's a killer dress movie.
Yeah.
And then just show some of the imagery. That's how you sell this movie.
Yeah.
And then the rest of it, people will come in and then they'll get the rest of it.
If you want to sell it to that A24 audience, then you sell it on the fact that it's about a black woman and it's about capitalism and it's about consumerism. These are the ideas that will
Oscar-winning black woman.
Yeah, absolutely. From Secrets and Lies, the Mike Leigh film.
Yep.
She's outstanding in this movie.
Marie Jean-Baptiste.
Marie Jean-Baptiste. I love In Fabric so much. I also love my number 4 movie, The Crescent, though you want to talk about In Fabric being sort of underseen and buried. The Crescent is a movie that, as far as I know, I'm the only champion this movie has.
Jim put it on his list, but
after
it was one of those changes.
I shook him and said, you have to watch this.
It is on Amazon Prime.
Yes,
and it was a pretty decent. It was in HD and everything.
It got like a Mill Creek or one of Echo Bridge, one of those DVD label kind of physical release as well. But it's a low budget movie that got it didn't have any kind of theatrical release. It didn't get any kind of notable press from any festivals it played. Most people, when I was sort of just browsing Letterboxd reviews after I saw it, most people hated it.
Oh, interesting.
And I love The Crescent. The Crescent is a messy movie, and I think that might be part of it. It's a low-budget movie, so it doesn't have the sort of crossover approachableness of It Follows or some of these other quote-unquote art house movies we're talking about. You can talk about how intelligent and sophisticated The Witch is, but the reason The Witch works is because Robert Eggers knows how to edit a horror movie and build tension, and he knows how to do the same things that Kubrick does, in The Shining and stuff like that. There are movies that are broadly appealing the way movies have already been broadly appealing. The Crescent feels more like one of the if The Witch is The Shining, The Crescent is Let's Scare Jessica to Death, where it's low budget and it's rough around the edges. And it doesn't not all the acting is all the way there.
The effects are iffy.
Yes. But... So The Crescent is about a woman whose husband died, and she's left with a 2-year-old son, and she goes to their beach house to sort of recuperate and just ruminate and figure out what she's going to do next. And as she's at the beach house, strange things start happening. This is, again, what I would call the grief ghost jam.
It's between the another thing I've heard that called is somnambulist, the sleepwalking.
Oh, sure.
I've heard that also. Grief ghost jam is your term.
Yes, I'm just trying to get it off the ground, so I'm trying to say it as many times as I can on this podcast. But I think somnambulist would describe the atmosphere and the tone, whereas just literally the plot elements is what I'm sort of referring to.
Yeah.
At any rate, as she's at this house, she hears this strange beeping. The thing this movie is it kind of knows that they have no money, so they go for super spectacular effects in unusual ways. One of the chief ways it does it, and there's a term for this, and I forget the term, but it is a type of oil painting where you have...
It's called marbling.
Marbling.
That's the term.
So you basically you have a body of water, and then you have paint that is less dense than the body of water, and it floats on top of it. And you drop droplets of paint into the water, and it expands into circles, and you can sort of manipulate these gorgeous sort of flowing shapes. And the chief image of the film it keeps returning to over and over again are these marbling sort of paintings that she's doing, and they're just spectacular looking. It also has a very I forget the name of the guy, but the guy Fabio Frizzi, zombie kind of a
yeah. I even wrote that in my review. He is very Fabio Frizzi-esque at music. He's the guy who did a lot of the best music for the Lucio Fulci movies.
Yeah, I especially just that kick drum. It just has that kick drum going. As these droning building synths and stuff build. So it has that going for it. But one of the chief interesting approaches it has is it's about this woman and her 2-year-old child, and the 2-year-old child is just played by a 2-year-old, and the way they shoot the movie, they keep switching aspect ratios because some of it is shot on professional grade equipment and it looks like some of it's shot on iPhones and stuff like that. They will, they're not afraid, because it is sort of a surreal film, they're not afraid to have the kid look at the camera. So they had the first shot of the movie outside of the spiraling, marbling paintings is the kid looking directly at the camera. And that happens from time to time, and it's not like, oh, they goofed. That's just an aesthetic choice they're making, is that the kid, as he just sort of wanders around, just sort of being weird passive observer the way little kids are, he will sometimes glance at the camera. But because they do that, what they have established is that they basically have a child actor who doesn't know he's in a movie.
Yeah, I think it's the director's son.
It would have to be either the director's son or the actress's son, or it would have, it would have to be, because it's clear that they are sort of just filming him and letting him sort of dictate where a scene will go. They have him just sort of babbling the way little kids babble. And it is this absolutely true, real. I mean, you talking about a non-acting performance when you're referring to an infant is kind of a ridiculous thing, but like most infants are, they don't really have a lot of these moments. Though I will say one of the most striking shots of Jaws, always to me, is after the shark attack at the pond where the boat gets overturned. Like the last shot of that sequence is the little kid who is like making a sandcastle and singing, "Do you know the Muffin Man?" He's just sort of crying because everyone has sort of freaked out and panicked and there's just crowds everywhere. And the last shot is him crying. And you get the feeling in Jaws that Steven Spielberg just sort of worked around the kids being themselves and improvising and just didn't try to make them be anything they weren't. And this movie takes that to a further extreme. So you have this very real, interesting element in this very dreamy movie that sort of breaks the line between reality and fiction. And then, and I want to ask you, there is a moment in this movie that was the moment where my jaw dropped to the floor and kind of didn't come back up for the rest of the film. And I wonder if you know what I'm talking about, and B, if we should spoil it.
Is it, well, okay, the first guess off the top of my head is her dream where her husband comes out of the bathtub and has marbles.
Yes.
Okay.
But specifically, she gets pulled into the painting.
That's right.
And she disappears. Yeah. I'll just say, because I want to sell you guys on this movie. It's really worth watching. So he is this, helpless infant. He is wandering around. There's a sequence where it looks like he's going to trip on one of his toys and fall down the stairs that you can tell just from looking at individual shots that there's no danger there.
But it really feels like there could be in it. Yeah.
So that's earlier in the film. Now he is alone in this house. There's no dialogue. There's no explanation. Is she going to come back? Because the way she disappears is so bizarre and surreal. You have no way of like, wait, what the fuck? What's going on? And you're basically watching this kid, and the way they do it is really smart. I've actually had this movie playing on silent in the background because I haven't watched it since I saw it at this film festival years ago. The way they do it is really smart. They don't do anything that you go, oh, that's not ethical. They were scaring the kid. They didn't tell the kid what was happening. They just sort of have these unnerving images of the kid getting dirtier.
and eating junk.
And just sort of like, and instead of being terrified that his mom is missing, he kind of is just goofing off and like walking around this empty house, and that makes it scarier.
Yeah, it does.
And it is like this just chill went through me in a way that, there are a lot of films that are shocking, but they usually are telegraphing the fact that they're shocking, and then they can't shock you anymore. Like you can't watch a Rob Zombie movie and go, oh my God, I can't believe he went there, because the whole movie he's basically telling you, I'm going to go there. I'm crazy,
Yeah.
This is not a movie where you expect this sort of child endangerment, though, again, the way they shoot it, I'm not saying that they actually endanger this child.
You can let your suspension of disbelief go pretty easily. It is clear that the kid is fine.
Right, but because the performance has been so naturalistic and has been the sort of single thread of reality through the whole film, that is so terrifying. And I was just blown away. And the whole movie takes a lot of bold choices that are really interesting. It's not a quote-unquote about anything the way a Babadook would be, or even The Witch, you could say, is. Like, there's no real deeper theme. It's just she is grieving her lost husband, and then mysterious things are happening. And it has this great score and this very hypnotizing imagery, and it has this slow pace, and it has this like beguiling element in this little kid's performance, and it goes some places as far as the antagonist, I guess you could call it. It is just a fascinating movie, and then the problem is it has an amazing final shot, and then it goes on for another 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So the whole movie is very surreal and nightmarish, and you don't know exactly what's happening. And then there's a sort of beautiful drone shot of the waves of the tide going in and out on this beach. And it looked, and from the sky, it looked exactly like the marbling photos. And it is just this like beautiful, still, unsettling, very melancholy sort of an image. And then it kind of just goes into a psychedelic sequence where it explains everything. And it's like, by the way, when you heard this little thing, that was actually, it's almost a, what was that movie with John Cusack, Identity?
Identity, yeah.
Identity, where they're just like, by the way, these all these little things, they were this and this and this. We're going to explain. We set up the puzzle, and now we're going to reveal how he did it. You know,
yeah.
It's like turning to the back of the Encyclopedia Brown book.
Or Our Usual Suspects was a big one that did that whole like replayed everything.
Yeah, it's like The Usual Suspects, except instead of revealing something about the person who's being interrogated, it's just spelling everything out for you in a way that totally deflates it. So, like, honestly, like, I don't know if I should put this movie this high because I do think those 10 minutes are terrible and kind of make what came before it worse.
I think it worked okay enough. I think that the movie itself is just amateur enough that it felt like this was a try that didn't work to me.
Yeah.
That ending just didn't work, but I'm willing to extend benefit of the doubt to this particular filmmaker with all the limitations that he had.
Yeah, and
I was okay with it.
And it's like, it's one of those movies that there was just so many interesting aspects about it. Formally, just some of the choices, the ideas he had as far as how to direct actors and how to utilize a child actor on screen, which I'd never seen done in any movie. Other than, like, you're going to see a lot of social realist sort of coming of age films that use non-actors and stuff like that, but like never in this context. I love The Crescent, and it is on Amazon Prime streaming, and I did sort of reveal the big thing that sort of shocked me. So maybe if you watched it knowing all this going in, you would not be as impressed. But I do think this movie is pretty spectacular.
Well, and it is. You did mention the Babadook. I think it's worth mentioning that the Babadook, and Under the Shadow are similar at their core. They're all about a woman in some sort of state of mourning, basically trapped with a child, and how they're going to deal with the supernatural things going around them, which could represent any number of things. This is the least good of those three, but all three of them are really fascinating, great movies that are an interesting triple feature. But I did want to ask, and I guess this is a spoiler, so I guess if you don't,
at this point we've pretty much spelled the whole movie out.
Well, I want to ask you, Patrick, that I watched it. Is at the very end, is it implying that the father isn't dead, but that they're just getting divorced? Oh. And that the funeral at the beginning was for her dad?
I don't. I unfortunately, I had this on in the background silently, and I was just sort of looking up at the imagery. The actual, my memory is that there is a constant beeping that's happening outside the house, and that revealed to be like a life support machine.
Right, and at the very end, you hear the father's voice, and I just sort of realized they never specifically say that they're at her husband's funeral.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if that's supposed to be like a twist on the thing, which to me makes it more interesting, because then that means Babadook is about, I might be wrong, Babadook is about a woman whose husband has died. Under the Shadow is a movie about a woman whose future was basically taken away from her by bad political shit. And then this movie is about a woman whose husband and her, their relationship is ended. Mm-hmm. I just thought that made them more interesting, but I don't know if I read that wrong.
I mean, I honestly, like I said, I saw this a couple years ago at a festival, and that to me was not the interesting thing. I kind of actively rejected the ending that explains what happened, because to me that is like the worst thing you can do. So that did not stick in my brain. So as much as I love this movie, I can't claim to be its foremost expert.
Okay. Well, I wasn't necessarily looking for an answer. Sure. I was just wondering if that was the implication you got. I think the reason the ending worked for me is because in the end it is such a sort of sad thing that I get what they were going for by showing us the quote, the good times or whatever. Yeah. Like I understand the idea behind it. And another thing I like about it is that the antagonists, these sort of ghosts, or they're like hermit crabs.
That is another just like such an interesting choice and very unnerving, even if the special effects themselves aren't spectacular. Like hermit crab human beings. Is and that such an unnerving image.
Yeah, and it's this idea of the idea behind the hermit crabs, but also the idea that death maybe feels like, there's always something to me about ghost stories where death is a option.
Yeah.
That is really both moving and unnerving to me. Like the idea that maybe death is a good thing. I like that kind of thing in a story, and I think this does that. That it hints at that well. So this is a very interesting movie. Mm-hmm. Very, very interesting movie.
And people should. My number 3 is a lot more approachable, and I honestly don't have a ton to say about it, other than because I think its pleasures are pretty much on the surface. It's Tragedy Girls, another film that I think kind of got overlooked a couple years ago. Same year, actually. Tragedy Girls is about 2 teenage girls who run a kind of a true crime blog where they're obsessed with serial killers. And the thing is, no one gives a fuck about their true crime blog. So, but there is a serial killer who is operating within their town, and they pull a Jason Goes to Hell, where they lure him out by one of them is hooking up with a guy in a parked car. It's sort of a slasher movie villain bait, and the slasher movie villain shows up. The guy gets killed. She escapes. They trap him, and these 2 girls are actually sociopaths who want him to teach them how to be slashers, which is a good premise on its own. It's a little reminiscent of something like Behind the Mask, but it's sort of a compelling premise. But the thing that made me love this movie, sort of typifies why this movie is so special to me, is in the first scene, one of the first scenes of the movie, when they set up this premise, he sort of doesn't want to play ball with them, and then they immediately go, "Okay, boomer." like they just kind of instantly go, "All right, fuck you. Who cares? We don't need him. This guy sucks. Look at him. He's like this weird hillbilly guy. Like he's just this total stereotype. Like let's just kill some people. I don't know." So this is a horror comedy, and I did on my podcast Tracks of Damn, where I did commentary tracks for horror films. I did a commentary track for each of the Scream movies, and because it is one of my favorite series, and this is very reminiscent of Scream. One of the funniest things about the first Scream is that Ghostface keeps getting his ass handed to him, which when you know that the killer are Billy and Stu, and they're just these like 2 teenage dopes who are like who watched a bunch of scary movies, took some notes, and then decided to be slashers, but then like unlike Jason, they just get hit in the balls or get a vase smashed on their head.
Yeah.
And they're constantly just getting doors slammed on their face or their hands smashed in car doors. So it reminds me of a line that Tobe Hooper had about Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which he said one way of looking at it is that it's a comedy about Leatherface's worst day.
Yeah.
Like, it's just Leatherface is trying to live his life, and all of these people just keep coming in, and he's just like, Jesus Christ, all these bodies are piling up. What am I going to do?
Which is sort of the premise of Tucker and Dale. Anyway.
So I always thought about the quote when I was watching Scream, where that Scream is a movie about 2 high school doofuses who learn that being a serial killer is harder than it looks. Tragedy Girls takes that a step further, where they are not the antagonists, they are the protagonists, and the thing that sort of makes you root for them, even though they're sociopaths with really no redeeming features, and they aren't like, we're woke, we're killing the bad guys, like, they're totally narcissistic assholes, is they have a lovely friendship. And the 2 leads of this movie have amazing chemistry. Alexandra Shipp and Brianna Hildebrand, the latter is in those Deadpool movies.
Actually, one of them is Negasong at Teenage Warhead from Deadpool, and the other one is Storm from the last 2 X-Men.
Oh, really? I didn't realize Storm was
in
the last
2 they're both X-Men.
Well, there we go. So
I didn't recognize them, either of them, out of costume. I waited until the movie was over and I looked them up.
They have way more personality in this movie than they would ever in any X-Men movie. It's a really smart script. It's a script that very easily could be, and the trailer makes it look like this, which I think is why a lot of people stayed away. It looks like a screed about, like, oh, millennials, they're so narcissistic. All they care about is likes on Facebook. Like, it seems really lame and tired, but, like, the movie's on their side because they're having the most fun. You know?
Yeah.
You kind of root for them because they're just so cute together. They're just wonderful, and it's a very sharp script, and it's almost reverse Tucker and Dale sort of a thing where they keep murdering people, but it keeps getting written off as an accident.
Right, which is very funny, and they have to go out of their way to make it not an accident.
It's such. I think the way it's paced is really good. I think It's very funny. It's very clever. It's got a very good balance of being satirical without being like a screed. You know, it's not about like, you know, like, oh, you know, kids these days, they're all basically murderers because they have no empathy because they on the damn phone, you know, like it's not a fucking Steve Harvey movie.
It's not. No, it's not.
So it kind of has all the pleasures of Scream as being like this clever subversion of slasher movies and stuff like that. But it also is just on its own a very funny comedy in the vein of Heathers or something like that. It's operating in a lot of these spaces, and it's just like so up my alley. As a Scream fan, I just love it.
It's on Hulu.
It is, yes.
That's where I saw it, and it looks like Tyler McIntyre, the director. His first movie, Patchwork, is on Shudder. I have not seen it.
I've heard good things about it. I saw this at a film festival, and he was there, and he did a Q&A, and I talked to him afterwards, and I told him about my whole Tobe Hooper quote Scream thing and how much I loved his movie because of how much it like tied into that and everything. And like I walked up to the director after the movie and I praised him immensely on his movie, and he said, "Hey, thank you. You're very observant that I'm great at making movies." And then I said, "Yeah, this guy knows what's up. He thinks I'm observant." Like, this is the most self-serving way of saying that I like this movie. But I really want to see what Tyler McIntyre does next. My number 2 movie is a found footage movie, technically, Unfriended. This is another movie that I think it's a divisive movie. It has its fierce supporters, but I think there are a lot of people who found it very obnoxious.
I think a lot of people didn't see it and made assumptions.
Yeah.
I honestly, I read so many people like, oh, this dumb... Oh my God, my cat is purring so loud. I don't know if it was picking it up. This dumb presence and blah, blah, blah. And I realized none of the people actually saw it. So
it's a movie that, well, part of it is the title. It seems like a joke.
Yeah.
The actual thing that makes this movie compelling is it is just obsessed with mundanity. It is absolutely obsessed with the way that, anytime you make a statement like, these days when we're on the internet, like it sounds pompous or whatever, but like you do sort of slip into a different kind of reality, a different kind of experience when you are just sort of browsing the internet and jumping from one website to another, jumping from iTunes and like chatting with someone at the same time. You're sort of operating on all of these different little planes, and it is just super obsessed with all of those mundane details about what it's like to be a bored teenager with a laptop. And I've just been there, and I am just someone who really responds to that sort of thing. And then aesthetically, the fact that the whole movie is a desktop and, everything is viewed through windows of, it's an Apple. So it's like viewed through Safari and iTunes and, she has a torrent going. So she's torrenting stuff like it's viewed through all of these different windows. And once the actual horror starts, which like in its climax, the horror is kind of cheesy and not
horror. To me, the horror is the straight horror part. Yeah. The R-rated horror is the only part that doesn't work for me.
Yeah, it's not the greatest, but I think that they have such a long buildup. I think especially the idea of there's this thing happening in the background, but your attention is so divided you don't notice it's happening. Like they're all in this group chat. This girl and her friends are on this group chat, and they are all like multitasking because that's what you're going to do. You're just hanging out with your friends online, which I've been in group chats like that when I was a teenager, or maybe like early 20s, because
I'm definitely not checking my email while we talk right now. That is for certain not happening.
Yeah, for sure. I didn't text anybody while recording this either.
No, absolutely not.
So it has that. I almost would compare it to something like Prince of Darkness, which is a premise I find interesting. There is an evil that is building and building, but its power goes unnoticed because it seems mundane, and everyone has their attentions divided. Once the horror starts, it's not spectacular in itself, though I think some of the sequences where she is trying to figure out how to use the computer to get out of it, how she is trying to like call for help and she goes in chat roulette, like that shit is really clever and fun. But I think also just this desktop screen premise itself is very confining and very claustrophobic in an effective way that I do think it is scary, especially, and this almost made my number 25, but ultimately I decided there should only be one unfriended movie, especially the sequel, which gets into the dark web and the actual serial killer shit that actually does exist on the internet. That movie is a lot darker and a lot less just fun. So that movie has a little bit more dread, but it's also less interesting and a little less believable because it tries to exist in a more realistic world. But then still there's just all this like techno magic stuff, hacker stuff. Whereas this is like, it's an internet ghost. Of course they could do it. It's an internet ghost.
I have this dream of like being able to become a teenager again for one night and go to a sleepover and everybody watches this movie on their laptops.
I didn't watch this movie on my laptop. The problem with this movie is that if you watch it on a DVD on your laptop, it's not a high enough resolution that the screen looks like a screen. It's just slightly lower resolution than an actual Apple laptop screen. And if you look at and I don't think anyone has a laptop that has a Blu-ray player. Like,
I mean, I have a connecting one, but no. You could buy it if it says, I'm looking this up as we're talking. Apparently it's on HBO right now. So if you have HBO Go or Now
there we go.
Or Amazon, you could watch it on there. Otherwise, maybe buy the HD version from Amazon or Vudu or iTunes.
It's fun. It's fun watching on your laptop. There is an added element, even if it does have This was a movie that played at festivals and then got picked up, and then they changed the title and they added the sort of final jump scare, which is lame. But it is, for me, there is something like my dirty secret is I love found footage. I just think 99% of found footage is terrible. I love found footage, but I love earnest actual commitment to the premise of found footage. I find the premise of finding footage compelling. I'm someone who likes to search for weird corners on YouTube and look up like videos someone uploaded of a talent show performance they did when they were like, I like to find footage, like, so I love found footage as an idea. In practice, it's just a way to save money. First and foremost, no one really cares about the medium is the message. No one cares about the sort of Marshall McLuhan kind of implications of found footage. They just want to save money. So, well, what if we just gave the actors camcorders? But I think Unfriended is the first movie I've seen since The Blair Witch Project, which is one of my favorite all-time horror movies, that understands the potential of found footage, and I love it a lot.
I think it's pretty great, and I wish more people had seen it and given it a chance.
My number one is The Lighthouse. It's my number one horror movie of the decade. It's my number one horror comedy of all time. It is my sense of humor. But before I say any more, it's my number one on the contingency that there were movies that I did not include because they weren't horror enough, including Upstream Color, which is like my favorite movie of all time and does have scary elements and does have sort of a sci-fi horror premise, you could say. But to me, it's just not really a horror movie. So I chose not to include it. If I did include it, that would be number one. Duke of Burgundy would have a strong chance of being number one if I included it. I also didn't go with The Love Witch or Shin Godzilla, which I don't think would top The Lighthouse, but would definitely be high up on my list. So, getting into The Lighthouse, why is The Lighthouse the number one horror comedy of all time for me? Number one, I think it is the funniest and the scariest. There, that's easy.
There you go. The end.
I think Willem Dafoe's performance in The Lighthouse is one of the most insanely perfect things I've ever seen in my life. Every face he makes is the most hysterical, intense, caricature, crazy lithograph-ass fucking face I've ever seen. I don't know how you do that with your face. I mean, he's Willem Dafoe. He's been doing crazy
things. He is a weird-looking man.
He's a weird-looking man. He's been doing weird stuff with his face for an entire career. But, like, some of his expressions in this movie just kill me. And it does make me sound like I'm a child when I describe why I like this movie. When I'm just like, I like the man with the funny faces. But, like, it really is that simple. Like, I am just so delighted by this movie. I love Robert Pattinson in this movie. I love him when he is just quiet and put upon. And so for me, this is a comedy in that it's like, it's like My Shitty Summer Job kind of comedy. Oh, there's that one summer where I had to work in the ice cream truck, and there was no air conditioning, and I had crazy coworkers, and I lusted after the girl, but she never noticed me. Like it feels like an 80s like summer comedy, except it's also like a 20s German expressionist film.
Yeah. Like they even used they did stuff to make it look like, I can't remember what I read, but something about the way they did the photography.
Well, the aspect ratio is a more narrow aspect ratio. It's not 4:3. It's more narrow than that. Tighter. It's like, it's something that hasn't been used since the 20s, which is beautiful.
But they did something to the film too. That
was it?
I don't remember.
I couldn't tell if it was shot on digital or film.
It was shot on film, but then on top of that, they fucked with the film. Yeah,
it is.
They did something.
It is spectacular looking, especially early on, before anyone has any dialogue, and he's just able to just totally go crazy Jean Vigo, expressionist fog and lighthouse and ships and beach and like rocky, like black and white, gray. Like it is so insane looking. It's really hard to overstate how beautiful the lighthouse is. But also like it's a movie about a battle bird. That to me is sort of the chief confounding paradox that makes the lighthouse just so much fun to think about. And I honestly, like, when I think about my favorite movies, I tend to think about movies that I have the most fun thinking about, more so than the movies that are the most complete or, highest quote unquote artistic, objective artistic achievement. For me, I just like ruminating on the lighthouse in the way that I like ruminating on something like computer chess or something, where it is just baffling. It is such a strange confluence of inspirations and ideas and sort of borrowed aesthetics and new ideas and weird sense of humor and totally jaw-dropping performances. Robert Pattinson, he's had a good couple years of really impressing people with sort of how much he can stretch beyond Edward Cullen. So I love him when he's just sort of the put upon, like just getting dumped on. He just has to clean the latrine or whatever. But when he starts losing it and he starts snapping, like that, I equally love. Like Willem Dafoe it's like one of my favorite performances of all time is Willem Dafoe in this movie. So I would say it reaches that level. I think there's a weird competitive thing that people do when they watch movies that isn't necessarily fruitful, where if it's a two-handed kind of a movie, you tend to think like, oh, which one won? As if the two actors aren't collaborating. I think like There Will Be Blood is a movie where people do that a lot, where they're like, well, Paul Dano can't stand up to Daniel Day-Lewis, and you watch the movie and you're like, yeah, that's the point. So like I don't know why I just had to frame it that way, except that the whole movie is just about them butting heads, and the way that in Fabric sort of the department store is hell. It's not just like, oh, it's like he's trapped in hell. It sucks so bad. No, Willem Dafoe's literally Mephistopheles. This is just an eternal punishment. Everything Willem Dafoe does is just done to undercut Robert Pattinson's sort of confidence in how he's even interpreting events. He does it in just a perfectly infuriating way that the first time I saw it, I didn't even really pick up on what was going on towards the end. Second time I watched it, I had like an assisted listening device in the theater, and that helped a lot because the dialogue is, there's accents and it's sort of very flowery dialogue, and it's all taking place during thunderstorms, so you can miss
a lot of shanty, a lot of sea shanty shit going on.
It's so funny. That bird is so funny, and for me, 2019 was like the year of funny birds. Like it was the year of Untitled Goose Game. Like this is Untitled Seagull Game, basically. Yeah. Where that bird only exists to torment when he's sitting on that doorstep and he's just squawking at Robert Pattinson. I have a weird sense of humor. For me, Killing of a Sacred Deer is one of the funniest movies of the decade. Like, I don't know. I know the first time I saw this movie, I think everyone was expecting a more straight horror film like The Witch. And I was definitely the one laughing the loudest in the theater. I just had such a good time. And it's scary. And it is, like, frightening as far as, like, one's going to, degrade the other and kill it. Like, if you've seen a Lars von Trier movie, none of that's going to shock you. If you've seen Antichrist, then you've seen what two people butting heads in the middle of nowhere will look like. But
it's not off-putting like that.
No, that's the thing. It's not just about wallowing in misery. It has such a deft sense of humor in a way that The Witch has a sort of wryness to it, especially at the end with sort of Black Phillip and the line that we were talking about that became a meme. Like there is a little hint of this movie in The Witch. And I think The Witch is a spectacular movie. The fact that for a sophomore film to open up as much as Robert Eggers has, to refine his thing, to find new ways to baffle and surprise and delight me.
To be totally different and yet the same.
Yeah, it is. It's so exciting. It's such an exciting thing. This is my favorite film of 2019. Like I said, it's just at the top of so many lists for me because it is. When I watch it, I just feel pure, unfiltered joy. The design of the mermaid and the way she screams, that is so creepy. That one shot that is forever burned in my brain until I'm on my deathbed of Willem Dafoe with the lighthouse lanterns coming out of his eyes as Poseidon. Holy fuck, this movie has it all.
Well, so for me, all the things you're saying are all the things I was expecting. And so the things I wasn't expecting it to be so coherent.
Yes, that's
I was thinking I was just going to have to go into this and treat this like an art house. I thought this was going to be like Alejandro Jodorowsky level shit going on, but it's very coherent. It makes sense in its own logic, and it builds in beautiful ways, and it has ebbs and flows. And like The Witch, it never feels slow or like describing how little actually occurs might sound weird to someone, but it's very easy to watch.
It never loses that wit. It never loses that ability to surprise you, even if you look at the structure of the movie, it's the same thing happening over and over again.
Over and over.
But that's essential to the idea of this lighthouse being hell, is just them stuck in this eternal cycle. I love that. I love the lighting. We already talked about how spectacular it looks, but just choosing to light this mostly through a single lantern, it's so amazing.
What it reminds me of, in the best way that I'm not a huge David Lynch fan, but I really like The Elephant Man, and to a certain extent, and Elephant Man and excuse me, Elephant Man and Eraserhead both have that industrial thing going on that's so fetishistic and glorious and tactile.
Yeah.
There's some of those scenes that show just the way the lighthouse works.
It's obsessed with textures.
Yeah, and it's like the kind of movie, and this might not sound like a compliment, it's the kind of movie you could put on with no sound on a wall in a ritzy, gross bar.
Yeah.
And it just is on the wall as mood, and it would work. I've been to bars where they have old Betty Boop cartoons just on the wall because you don't need the sound for those. There's parts of this movie that you could just put it on the wall and just let people experience it as installation art.
But I also love that it's
also a real movie.
Yeah. And I also love that it's not respectable. I think The Witch, The Witch, you could say well, obviously it was a crossover hit because it's so respectable. It is so obviously about a thing and approaches it in a very staid and sort of true kind of way, and it has a patience, and it has all the signifiers of Kubrick. It has all the signifiers of of art house movies you have seen in the past, and this is what good cinema looks like. And I'm not in a way that's so fuck The Witch. Because it's fucking good. No, it's well made.
It's hedging itself. It's
a little bit.
It's trying to maintain a certain.
So The Witch is an example of a movie I loved from this decade that wasn't necessarily an exciting debut film, because I thought, well, this seems like the best version of this kind of thing. If he keeps making respectable, slow-paced horror movies, I'll be there for him. I'll watch him, but I don't necessarily think that he's going to be able to excite me doing this kind of thing over and over again. And it turns out his next movie was the most exciting thing I had ever seen. It was so much fun.
Yeah.
So that for me is my number one horror movie of the decade. If you want to, I think. Again, I'm maybe a more pessimistic person than some. My cohort, Jim Laskowski of Directors Club, is very good at getting himself excited when he hears rave reviews from a Sundance or a Cannes or whatever. He's very good at being super loyal to directors he loves and always being excited for their next movie. Even if they haven't made the movie at that high watermark in several years, you know, he always has that hope in him. He's a very joyful, optimistic person, and I am very much the opposite. So, like, for me, when I say this is the best movie of the decade, I also kind of feel like this is the high watermark for there has to be something new that comes along. We can't do any more. Like, we're going to see more movies that straddle the line between indie, art house theaters audiences and horror audiences. There's going to be plenty more of those. Like I said, all these things that, you know, every era of horror that has happened has continued to happen. You know? So they're all happening concurrently. We're going to keep getting more of this. I saw The Lighthouse. It was the absolute top of the mountain as far as what I want out of these movies. And now I'm excited for something to take a new approach. And I don't know what that is. And that's, you know, new decade. It's an arbitrary thing, but sometimes you just got to go with an arbitrary thing and say, all right, what are the 20s? What do the roaring 20s have for us other than environmental disaster?
How can we escape our impending doom?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, here I am with Betsy Jorgensen, who you may remember from the Witch podcast and the H.P. Lovecraft podcast. Hello.
Hey, it's me again.
Betsy has a list of 10 movies that she picked. Actually, technically 11.
Yeah, well, I'm a cheater.
But we're going to go in reverse order here, starting with Cabin in the Woods.
Yeah, Cabin in the Woods was my number 10. I think it was great when it came out. It billed itself as a pretty standard slasher movie, but it ended up being, you know, much more of a meta-commentary on horror.
Yeah.
Like Scream.
Well, yeah, and it's one of those things where
before.
After Scream came out, it kind of felt like you couldn't do that anymore, and then movies like this proved that there were still things you could do with being meta-commentary.
I feel it's really funny, because Scream did it, and then Scream H2O did it to itself again.
Yeah.
And I feel like after a while, like, we get a movie that does, you can point at movie trends where a horror movie will come out that will grab onto a trope or a meta-commentary or some stylistic thing that really grasps at something good about horror movies. Meta-commentary being a really difficult apple to grasp. Cabin in the Woods did a very good job of it, where it talked about all of the things about horror movies and whether they're really some great right feeding the audience to give more back, or whether it's really just some ancient deity in the ground, and like talking about whether it's archetypal characters from fiction or whether it's actually these deep archetypes within horror movies themselves. I mean, if nothing else, it really gave people like a lot of navel gazing to do on podcasts. So
yeah, and well, what's interesting? I think that the movies after it that we've had more recently, I think this is a meta decade for horror movies, but I think that part has become a little less heavily stated. I think Cabin in the Woods is one of the following Scream and Behind the Mask.
Yeah.
Rise of Leslie Vernon. It's one that put it front where something like put it in the front where something like It Follows is sort of a meta commentary on horror films, but it's also a standalone horror film. It's not being as open about it.
Yeah, with Cabin in the Woods, you had both the legitimate horror movie going on, i.e. the kids who are being preyed upon by an unseen force over them, and the meta commentary of all the people behind the scenes who are trying to murder the kids.
Right.
Which is a aspect of it you usually don't see. I think it really appealed to me in my top 10 list because in some way it's very much like a deadly haunted house, but it's all being done live on the fly.
Yeah. And one other thing about it is that It just barely makes the list. It came out in 2010, and it wasn't supposed to come out in 2010. It was held back, I think, almost 2 years.
Yeah.
So it is almost like a relic of the previous decade.
Yeah.
So then her number 9 is The Autopsy of Jane Doe, which is directed by Andre Uvredal.
Yeah, and I think this one, I don't even know.
We talked about it briefly on the Witch podcast, but only briefly.
Yeah, and did this one get a theatrical release? Because I only ever saw
it did in other countries.
Okay.
As far as I know, and it also had a, what do you call it, a festival release. So that's where the word of mouth happened. But then it took it a long time to get onto Netflix.
Fair enough. So, yeah, I saw it on Netflix. It is a movie that you wonder if it's going to be a haunting movie, a gross out movie, because it is a movie about an autopsy, but it's actually a bottle movie where it is very clever in its way of trapping its protagonists in a closed room and unfolds the mystery as things go on. It ends up actually being a witch feature.
Yes, it is a witch movie, which is, I guess, a spoiler, but
yeah,
don't have to get much more into spoilers than that.
But
yeah. Really good performances.
Yeah, just real good.
Basically, cast of only 3 people and some. I guess there's some extra people and there's some kind of dead bodies that walk around, and that's a cast member. But yeah, it's a bottle episode, which is a thing that is most well known for, like, these days for sitcoms are known for their bottle episodes.
Yeah, but it's a closed door mystery because you've got everything you need. It's very interesting. It's a closed door mystery within a body. Like, everything about a murder happens within this body, and everything that you need to solve the mystery is within the room. But also the people within it are trapped within a building. So it's all very claustrophobic, and at the same time, just very interesting. It expands in some weird ways, but doesn't do that with, like, cheating via flashback, which sometimes movies like this will do, where they'll be like, but actually, we're going to show you in 1700 what actually happened. No, they actually keep it pretty concise.
And they do a good job. Yeah, it's a movie that could have been only 30 minutes long. It's 90 minutes long, but it fills the time.
Yeah.
I think that actually when it becomes a flat-out horror movie are the only times when it falters at all. But even then, I still think it's pretty strong.
Yeah.
Okay, number 8 is The Babadook, which is on everybody's list. It's on my list. I haven't gotten all the lists back at the time of recording, but I think we all love The Babadook.
The Babadook, real good.
And it's an interesting movie because it had a mainstream appeal, and that's surprising because it's challenging.
It is. It had what I find to be very difficult, a good child actor in a horror movie.
Who's playing a difficult child, which is something that's hard for a lot of people to deal with. I've heard plenty of people say they couldn't even watch the movie because of him.
Yeah. I mean, admittedly, I did not like The Witch because of the children actors. Well, there were other things too. And that is a disagreement between Gabe and I.
Yeah, and other people have picked The Witch, so we're going to end up talking positively about it anyway.
Yes, there will be positive mentions, and I will not go into my criticisms. But The Babadook is actually one that was really interesting. I watched it with a friend of mine who is very critical towards children actors in horror movies, and she loved it. I was actually very much thinking we would be turning it off, and part of it was it really exemplified the trial the mother was going through.
Right.
And you really understood why the child was acting that way. And they pushed it to its absolute limit, but kept it within the bounds of bearability.
Right. And something that will probably come up in the other discussions, definitely with Patrick, is there's a movie called The Crescent and a movie called Under the Shadow that also deal with loss and single mothers trying to raise children following loss that I think make a great triple feature with this. I'll go into that more at a different time, though.
Yeah. Speaking of another movie that was absolutely ruined by children actors that will come up again later in the list, Silent Hill.
Yeah. Okay, so number 7 is another one that showed up on a lot of lists is Hereditary, Ari Aster's debut. I believe his debut. I think it's his first Yeah, it's his first feature-length movie.
Just real good.
And we talked about this one on the Witch podcast, too.
Yeah, because it's a real good movie.
I was curious that you didn't pick Midsummer. Did you only want to do one? Or did you just...
I have not seen Midsummer.
Oh, you still haven't seen it? Oh,
yeah.
I have the director's cut. We should watch it together sometime.
Yeah, that'd be
because
really
I've
fun.
not seen the theatrical cut. I waited and I went straight to director's cut.
Fair enough. Yeah, it's because I hadn't seen it.
Okay.
I'd heard a very good thing. Anyway, but Hereditary, I probably would have put Midsummer on, considering how much I do love a folk horror movie, but I hadn't seen it, so I couldn't put it on. But Hereditary, I do love just because give me some good black magic, especially some well-researched black magic in a good horror movie, and I will be on your side.
So then we're going to get to one that nobody else is probably going to vote for. So this is a good Betsy pick.
Oh,
Number
man.
6, American Mary,
Which
is directed by the Soska sisters, Jen and Sylvia. This was their second feature-length film. They've done more since. They just had a remake of Rabid come out. And I just watched this 2 days ago. And I liked a lot of things about it, and I didn't like a lot of things about it.
So it's not... Okay, so it does show up higher on my list than it probably would have if I had watched it recently. It is a strong movie, but it left a very big impression on me. American Mary, for those of you that don't necessarily know what I'm talking about, is a movie about a girl who is trying to go through medical school and can't finish for reasons in the movie. And ends up being a
body modification
for hire for the alternate scene. And it ends up also kind of being body modification revenge.
Right.
Which is why it's a horror movie.
And that's also why it was a little too much for me. It felt like
that
every 20 minutes was a new movie.
Yeah.
So it almost felt to me like they had a TV series called American Mary, and it ran 10 episodes.
It was definitely long.
Well, and it makes me wonder if the Soska sisters didn't think they were going to get another deal. Like, this movie, it wasn't expensive, but it's got a pretty high-end cast for independent. It's got Catherine Isabelle, who's always great, as the lead. It looks good. It's well shot.
Catherine Isabelle, it was early enough in her career.
Yeah, she wasn't quite she had done Ginger Snaps.
She had done Ginger Snaps, but she hadn't done Hannibal.
She hadn't done Hannibal yet.
And she is very nice looking in this.
Yes, she's good looking in this. But she's also just good in it. She's always good.
I mean,
she carries the movie
very
well.
Good. Like, a tour de force. She acts amazing in it. Even the parts of it that are even a little much for anybody who has a strong stomach for horror, she can carry through. It is a lot. I mean, it's body modification by force, so...
I didn't look at the rating. I think I would assume it was still an R-rated movie, but it's violent enough that it could have been unrated. I didn't check
I think it's R.
Yeah.
I mean, it's violent enough it might be unrated, but, like, it was on Netflix.
It's more disturbing, and in fact, a lot of the really gross stuff is left to our imagination.
Yeah. Again, it's been a long time since
I've seen it. The Soska sisters themselves appear...
Yeah.
And their surgery is the grossest, I think. They exchange arms.
Yeah.
Which is a really disturbing idea to me.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess a lot of it. A lot of it is just the fact that body modification is just a disturbing image. You don't even need to actually have a special effect. They have actors who had body mods come in and just stand there, and that's enough for some of it.
But it's just, like, it is a movie I feel like it was a lot of places. I saw the still of it a lot of places, but I feel like it fell off the public consciousness, so.
Yeah, well, and I've heard totally mixed things on it, too, all these years. I just hadn't gotten around to watching it. I think it's well made and interesting enough that it makes people take sides on it.
Yeah.
Which is better than a lot of movies that just aren't interesting enough for anybody to even care about.
That's fair.
Next is one that I couldn't find a copy of, so Betsy's going to have to tell me about it. It's The Shrine, came out in 2010 by John Nautz, I think is how you say his name, Knautz. This was on Netflix for a while, and it disappeared, and now it just seems to have disappeared from the face of the earth.
Yeah, so this one might not be as good as I remember. So it is what I like to call the better Silent Hill movie.
Mm.
The better Silent Hill movie, or the only Fatal Frame movie we were ever going to get. It's basically a group of tourists who are going through a foggy wood and stumble across this statue. And
she did a little sign with her hand. Right
yeah,
there.
Like
I
flip it. I flipped my hand, and it's indescribable. Like, it's like an angel, but like its face is like melted, and there's very weird music to it, and they see it, but like every time they turn away from it, it's turning back to them, and it's very spooky. And as they leave, they come across this village, and the village treats them as if they have all been possessed, and very much like starts trying to exorcise them, and all of these terrible things, and you're like, okay, this is a crazy village of, like, cannibals and all these things, and it's played completely straight until, like, the last 15 minutes, where you realize maybe they had a point.
Mm.
And that's when it went from being like, oh, maybe this is a bit too much, to, this is the best twist I've seen in a Netflix movie in, like, 10 years, and it was well acted, had good effects for what little there were, and, like, everything looked very good about it.
So is it count as folk horror too, you think?
Yeah, I think it was a good folk horror.
So Netflix had some good folk horror movies. I don't know if this was a Netflix exclusive. It seemed like it was.
Yeah.
But they also had the Apostle, which I thought was great.
Yeah.
And they also had, there was one other one, The Ritual.
Yes.
Which I don't think was their exclusive, but it was here in America.
Yeah. Good folk horror on Netflix, but you have to watch a lot of really bad folk horror on Netflix. And that's also why I have watched a lot of terrible movies on Netflix. Anyway.
Your number 4 is Black Swan.
It's very good.
Which is something I was surprised more people haven't picked, at least not yet, because it was on my list. And I guess we were saying people might not consider it a horror movie. I absolutely consider it a horror movie.
I don't think people think it's a horror movie because it had broad mass appeal.
Yeah. Oscar nominated. It won one. Natalie Portman won.
I think people think it was a drama thriller because there wasn't a clear horror element in it. So there wasn't a killer. There wasn't the devil. So, like, Rosemary's Baby is clearly horror. Psycho is clearly horror. This has some psychological and or potentially supernatural elements, but it's all very borderline, like you don't really know if it's reality, and all of that can be, like, pushed to drama.
Yeah.
So people are like, oh, it's not a horror movie. I watched that with my mom.
Yeah. It's one of the scariest movies I saw in the theaters in the last decade. It's one of the few movies to make me jump. I do not remember which scene it was, but I actually jumped out of my seat. I can't remember what it was. It's also it has a lot of homages to Perfect Blue, the animated film.
Well.
And Suspiria, which are both horror movies.
I mean, Suspiria, yes. But, like, Perfect Blue, it's because Aronofsky...
Well, he actually has the rights to Perfect Blue.
Yes.
Because he wants to borrow from it. So he has... Aronofsky, if he wants to, he can remake Perfect Blue whenever he wants, but instead he's been borrowing bits for his other movies.
I mean, specifically that underwater scream scene. He loves it to death.
Yeah.
He wants it. He wants it so many times. He's like, oh, give it.
Well, I would consider this, Requiem for a Dream and Mother, all horror movies, personally.
Yeah.
I think that Requiem for a Dream is not a movie that's as good as I remember it being, but at the time it freaked me out a lot.
Oh, yeah, no.
So.
I think there are horrific movies that should be in the horror genre, but people are like, oh, they don't have enough horror elements and appeal to the mainstream. They're not trashy like horror movies.
I mean, there's a part in this where Winona Ryder just starts stabbing herself in the face with a nail file. That's
horror.
Gross.
Yeah. I obviously put it on my horror list.
Yeah.
So.
I agree with it, and I think it's one of the best movies of the last decade, period. And I don't know why it kind of disappeared a little. Maybe it's because Mother had a bad critical reaction, and people kind of second guessing Aronofsky.
Jennifer Lawrence.
Yeah, I think people are second guessing Aronofsky because of that. I actually kind of liked Mother, but I don't know if I liked it for the right reasons. I'll go into that with someone else
who actually put it on their list. Yeah.
So which brings us to number 3, which is another good Betsy choice, which is Krampus.
I love a good holiday horror movie. Like, I feel that Christmas is a good time for horror. Charles Dickens. Really just laid out a good Christmas ghost story. I mean, I do also like a good Halloween, always good.
Well, yeah, Michael Dougherty did this, and he did Trick or Treat, which was
so
a huge
good.
celebration of all the pagan parts of the Halloween season.
It's so good.
And so this is his. I mean, this is a very clear follow-up to that.
Oh my, yeah.
Only difference is that this one isn't a portmanteau. It's standalone.
It's just so good. I love Krampus. I watch it every year. I also love Krampus and Krampusnacht and all of the, like, spooky parts of Christmas. They're the best. But part of the reason I really like this as a horror movie itself is horror movies, I feel, come in two big flavors. And one is silly horror movies, like campy horror movies. And we, like, you can have that kind of, like, love of a campy horror movie and, like, the serious, like, okay, I'm actually spooked out and disturbed by this.
Right.
And having both of them to, you know, balance out your palette is fine. And I have plenty of type B on my list, and this is a little bit of type A.
Yeah. The thing I like about this movie is that it's lighthearted enough and violent enough to be both a good kids movie, but also maybe not something you should show kids.
Yep.
But even beyond that, it's bleak.
Oh, it's so bleak.
And that's something that surprised me the first time I saw it, was that it was okay with being bleak, and that.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what made it better than a lot of holiday horror movies, and at least what put it in a different category.
Yeah, it does not have a happy ending.
Like, yeah, Gremlins has a happy ending. Movies like the Santa Claus slasher movies like Silent Night, Deadly Night, and Christmas Evil. Those the bad guy ends his spree eventually.
Yeah, or you never find, like, I do like a understanding of who the bad guy is, but not a happy ending.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I do want answers. Those answers don't have to give me, like, closure.
Yeah.
The original Black Christmas, like, the fact that he wasn't caught, but also we never knew who he was.
Yeah, we never find out who the killer is.
Like, I get it, but I don't like it as much.
Okay, but yeah, no, this is a good movie, and yeah, again, it does a good job of that thing that actually scared me as a child is the existential horror of you can't get away from something.
Yeah.
There's no option to beat it.
No,
that's a very horrifying thing.
Like, Grandma had to do this every year, and she messed up.
Yeah. Which, it's funny, too, because it's such a companion piece to Hereditary. It's almost even more than Midsommar is. They both have Toni Collette kind of going out at it, but they have the grandma being a problem in both of them, too. And yeah it's funny. Mm-hmm. Okay, your next one, your number 2 is Tucker and Dale versus Evil, which is a movie I had put off watching until you and 2 other people picked it for their list.
Yeah. How did you like it?
I loved it. I thought it was adorable.
Yeah.
Absolutely adorable. And it's another one that is 2010, end of the last decade. We're still in our outwardly meta phase. We're still acknowledging everything.
It was also put off a couple of years.
Also, yeah. And so
it is really, it feels very much in the same style of Cabin in the Woods.
Yeah, it is. Well, and the basic idea is a backwoods slasher movie from the point of view of the hillbillies who aren't actually bad guys.
Yeah, and so, like, at first you get it from the perspective of the teenagers, and you're like, those hillbillies are going to be a problem, and then it switches perspectives, and you've got Alan Tudyk being his adorable self, and the other guy, whose name I can't remember.
It's literally not loading right now.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
It's really fun.
That one,
his name is Tyler Labine.
Yeah, and he's just...
He's very sweet.
He's... Yeah, pure.
And I kept on waiting for Tudyk to become an asshole, and he never does. He's always a supportive friend, no matter what horrible shit happens to him.
Yeah. Like, you really expect the turn to come
just
for... Yeah,
the sweetest platonic male relationship.
it's just so nice.
Yeah.
Like, and then, like, one of the girls from the
she ends up
camp
there.
goes over to his side, and there's, like, a bunch of misunderstandings, but then she's not stupid, and she's also not mean.
I think that the teenagers, or the college kids, they keep shouting college kids. The college kids kill themselves in every single case, right? There's not a single time that...
There's one that, like, is, like, halfway, where, like... But it's never, like, actually the hillbillies' fault. There's, like, one or two that are, like, mixed accident.
Yeah.
But...
And there was a note I made for myself while watching it that, like, someone accidentally jumping into a chipper shredder is funny, but someone actually jumping in and Alan Tudyk turning and screaming and trying to pull them out to help them is hilarious.
Yes.
That's what makes it hilarious, is Tudyk screaming and going, "Ah, no!" and trying to pull the guy's half body out as he's getting chewed up. Because he doesn't know what's happening. He's like,
why are they all trying to kill themselves? It becomes so funny and terrible and funny because it's like, why did all these college kids come to my land to commit suicide? And you're like, sometimes I have tried to remember this movie and put in a couple scenes of Zombievers, which came out about the same time, which is more of a, like, quote-unquote legit horror movie, but much worse in every way.
Yeah.
But tries to be that campy kind of horror movie, but they're actually zombie beavers, and they are actually killing people. But no, Tucker and Dale versus Evil, just a solid movie.
This one fits really well with the rise of Leslie Vernon behind the mask. They almost feel like they could be the same universe, and that's part of why all the college kids assume that they're psycho killers, is because they live in a universe that has actual slasher killers.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. That's very good.
But it can't exist in the Cabin in the Woods universe because nobody knows about any of the shit in that one, except for the special people underground.
Yeah.
Okay, and so that brings us to the last, technically, two, which are the most Betsy, because no one else picked these.
Yeah.
And no one else is going to pick these. I haven't gotten the other lists back, but I can guarantee
no one's going to pick
they're not going to be on there. And they're found footage. Grave Encounters, Part 1 and Part 2. I'm trying to remember. I think they're different directors, technically.
Oh, are they?
Grave Encounters is directed by Stuart Ortiz and Colin Minihan. And Grave Encounters 2 is directed by John Pullican.
Oh, that's fascinating. Okay, so Grave Encounters is a found footage movie that is basically... Okay, so it opens up introduced by the producer of the studio that was part of a Ghost Adventures.
Yeah, it's like Discovery Channel.
Yeah.
And there's the Ghost Hunters, that kind of stuff. I don't remember what channel that stuff's on, but...
Yeah. That was like, okay, so we've heard a lot of rumors about this, and so we're just releasing this footage. We've kind of put it together in an order so it makes a little bit of sense, but nothing else has been done to this, just to stop the rumors. Here you go.
And then
from there it's Grave Encounters, which is this ghost hunting show.
It's Ghost Hunters.
It's Ghost Hunters, yeah. And so it's they're exploring this asylum. And it's all very Ghost Hunters, but, like, they're still putting things together, so you get a little of the behind-the-scenes friction of, like, trying to set things up. Very straightforward ghost hunting mockumentary movie.
I think a nice touch is that this is, like, their 6th episode.
Yeah.
And they kind of imply that things haven't been going great.
Yeah, but, like, they haven't found anything on camera. Like, everything is... Like, they've gotten things in the can, but, like, they need to round out this 6th one to have the full series. This is probably their last one, and then they'll, like, be able to take a break for a while, and a lot of the times on found footage movies like this, they already are famous, or they've already, like, have an audience, and I feel like this one does a really good job of having them not have that yet, because... people are hungry for it then.
Right.
Anyway, things go wrong. Things go so wrong. Like, the asylum starts... And first you get, like, the normal ghost hunting things where, like...
Oh, did you see that? It moved! Oh my god!
Yeah. It moved! And then,
and they're very excited at first, of course.
But then it goes from, like, 1 to 12 real quick with, like, things moving. And, like, the doors won't open. But more than the doors won't open, like... hallways stop going to places.
And that was a good touch too, because they clearly have no budget for this movie. So an easy way to make something eerie is that the room just changes. Like, wasn't this door not here before? And then, like, suddenly they're back in the hallway they started in. That kind of illogical ghost house. Like, that's something that goes missing in a lot of haunted house movies that you get in haunted house stories. That I feel like the movies don't do as well as stories sometimes.
Which, again, I thought was really good. Like, this whole, they try to get out, but the reason they can't get out is, like, things start becoming illogical.
Physics make no sense all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so suddenly, like, the sun isn't coming up. Things, they've been in there days, they don't have any food left.
Yeah.
They have no idea how long they've been in there. And then people start disappearing.
And that part's a little bit like... The scary parts are a little bit like House on Haunted Hill remake with Jeffrey Rush, where it's an insane asylum and, like, the ghosts of the insane asylum are, like, taking the people.
Yeah.
That was something I got, because I like that movie. That's a cheesy... 1999, so that movie's almost 20 years old now. That's a cheesy movie that I was pulling this from. I'm not a huge found footage guy, so for me, this movie, a lot of it was the fact that the setup was charming. And I like good setups like that a lot. I think it makes a huge... I think that's why a movie that we couldn't put on any list, because it technically came out in 2009, was... name is escaping me. Lake Mungo. Lake Mungo has a great setup.
Lake Mungo has a great setup.
So, when you have the good setup... And that's why I've never really liked the Paranormal Activity movies, is I'm just not... I'm not as interested in that as idea that... you found someone's home movies as much as...
So, it ends up going, like, basically one person's left. Yeah. And that's it.
It just ends.
It ends, basically. So that's it, and that's all you hear. So, Grave Encounters 2 starts out with a guy in film school who is trying to figure out what he's going to do for his final project. And starts out, like, introducing his characters. But he's part of, like, a internet community who discusses fake movies. And they're like, Grave Encounters is so fake. Come on, guys. And, like, he's doing some things in film school to do, like, short movies. And so the first, like, 15 minutes of the movie are establishing the characters. So it's the filmmaker, his roommate, who's a stoner, but, like, also very buff. He's actually in Letterkenny, which is weird.
It's probably shot in Canada.
Oh, it's super shot in Canada. And then this very pretty girl who ends up being his star in, like, these monster movies because he wants to go back to the classic horror. That archetype of a director. But he keeps, like, being really kind of obsessed with Grave Encounters because he's like, I think this is real. And he ends up finding information online and getting sent, like, messages from an anonymous person to dig in to the story more. And he, like, goes to interview the original director's mom. And she's like, yeah, the director, that guy just, he was just here and all this. And, like, they go upstairs to the guy's room, and it's obvious that that guy has not been there in years. There's dust over everything. The mom has dementia and all of this. And they go to the studio that put out the original video, and they're bum-rushed out of there and all this. And then to, like, the guy's dorm room, they get unseen footage of stuff that happened after the first movie.
So it's a little bit like Rec and Rec 2, or Record and Record 2, Rec and Rec 2.
Yeah.
Where it starts as a sequel, but then it reveals stuff about the I like that. I like that.
So basically, something in the hospital is trying to get them to come to the place, and they get latitude and longitude of the location. And so they go to try to find out what's happening. And so they take a recording crew, and he decides this is going to be his senior thesis, is they're going to figure out the truth of grave encounters.
Was this the plot of the Blair Witch remake, or semi-sequel? I honestly can't remember anything about that movie.
The Blair Witch sequel was them giving tours of the area, and giving tours of the area, and some people wanted to see if the original one was true.
Oh, okay.
And some people were there to connect with the witch because they were Wiccan.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, so like
kind of remembering it now.
Yeah. And some people were just part of the town and angry, and some people were very goth. Like, Grave Encounters 2 was what you always wanted the Blair Witch 2 to be.
I see, yeah. Because I remember the actual Blair Witch 2 was terrible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Was there like a...
The Book of Shadows?
Yes, Book of Shadows was terrible.
But
The Blair Witch...
Just Blair Witch, the 2016 Anna Wingard movie.
I haven't seen that
one. Well then, I think this is sort of the plot of that, but I cannot remember. Again, it's a movie that just sort of in one ear and out the other. A lot of people who liked the original Blair Witch hated the later sequel. I didn't feel strongly either way.
I completely missed this came out.
Oh yeah, this came out in 2016.
Fair enough.
I think it's on Netflix. I don't know.
Probably. I'll probably check it out. Like, let's be real.
I didn't mean to derail here.
Admittedly, the movie I'm talking about came out much earlier.
Yes. So you're talking about Book of Shadows.
Yeah, Book of Shadows.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Yeah, where this is what I wanted this movie to be.
Right.
Where, like, this original movie came out, this original, like, found footage thing was found, and then everyone's like, yeah, it was real. No, it's super fake. Come on. All the effects were terrible. Blah, blah. And then one person's like, no, guys, I think it's real.
Yeah.
And then the terrible evil place sends them the videos and gets them back. And the ending is super intense. And I have it on disc, and I still really want you to see it, so I'm going to tell you how it ends.
We'll watch that one, and we'll watch... I already forgot what the other thing we were going to watch was. Oh, yeah, Midsummer Director's Cut.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
It'll be fun. When we do our found footage.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. So that was my top 10.
Great. Thank you very much. And now back to Gabe. So let's talk about Berberian Sound Studio then, which you picked.
Gotcha.
I picked. This is not Peter Strickland's first movie, but it kind of, I don't know. It was
his breakthrough film.
This one is also pretty much a horror movie, even if nothing. It's so meta that I suppose the horror is almost all existential and, personalized and maybe even in the character's head. But the idea is that there's an Italian horror movie that, is basically Suspiria. It's sort of implied that it's a similar movie to Suspiria. And they want a really good sound technician, since all Italian movies at the time were shot without sound and dubbed later. And he kind of, it's a Toby Jones kind of having the issue of him being a British guy in Italy and trying to learn how they work. That would be the normal movie, but since it's a Peter Strickland movie, he sort of falls into the fabric of the film in a weird way, and goes crazy, for lack of a better explanation. I think it's great. I don't know.
Yeah,
I think it's great too. It's on your list.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very interesting because it's, Peter Strickland, as we discussed, is sort of one of the sort of crop of horror directors from this era, from this decade, who is just really obsessed with sort of the Eurocult films of the 70s. And this is almost an obsession inside of an obsession, because this is the most interesting parts of the movie Blowout.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
So even though De Palma sort of was a contemporary of a lot of horror films of the 70s that are now fetishized or whatever, De Palma himself was also sort of influenced.
Well, yeah, Blowout is Blow Up, and Blow Up was influenced. It was considered a giallo kind of at the time. It was just a much higher echelon kind of giallo.
So all the best scenes in Blow Up are most of what this movie is made up of, but also it is absolutely fetishizing, the way that you would have in a Nicholas Winding Refn movie, like extreme close-ups of leather and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. This has the most luxurious shots of analog sound equipment you've ever seen in your life.
Yeah.
If you like reel-to-reel tapes and just knobs and sliders and stuff, if you ever watch a documentary about music production from the 70s and love looking at the boards and everything, this is going to be porn for you.
It's also, if we compare it to In Fabric and Duke of Burgundy, I feel like Duke of Burgundy is a movie where all the weirdness, the people in the movie are part of the weirdness, and in Fabric, the main character is sort of outside of the weirdness. But this is a case where this guy is an outsider, audience surrogate, entering the weirdness. So
it's a lot more approachable, but in the same tact, it's a lot less interesting.
Yeah.
Than the other two.
Right, and so this one is great to watch first, I think, though.
Yeah.
I think watching his movies in order is actually, if you're interested, watching Berberian, Sound Studio, then Duke of Burgundy, then In Fabric, really, it sets you up, it lets you into the world, and then it just sort of shows you the different ways this world can go and how emotionally satisfying and funny and actually scary all these things can be.
I feel like Peter Strickland got more and more comfortable. This seems like a movie where he is actually sort of thinking about commercial concerns. This feels like a film where he is telling a story in a way that a broad audience, the kind of audience who would like an art house kind of a horror movie, but a broad audience nonetheless, would want a film like this to go. And then by the time you get to In Fabric, the delight is just how far off the reservation he goes.
Right. And I think it's also you compared it to Refn. I don't think they're really comparable on their choices they make, but they are comparable in that way that Refn's early movies are pretty bald-faced attempt at doing a Tarantino-esque crime thing.
Yeah,
and it makes them his least interesting movies, and he kind of crests, I think, at a certain point. But I could see the way that they're going, that they both are going further away from what makes audiences comfortable.
And as someone who really liked Bronson and Drive, maybe it's possible that at some point Peter Strickland will go too far for me.
He'll have his Only God Forgives moment.
Yeah, where I go, I'm sorry, man. I'm out. I love and respect you, but I can't follow you down this road. But, so far, I love his whole career.
And so then we'll talk about The Strange Color of Your Body's Tears, because it's also if Peter Strickland is he fetishizes Euro cult, these filmmakers live it. I don't think that films can get much more fetishistic of the past. They make Tarantino look like a futurist,
It's true. And and fetishistic is really a key word, because even in scenes that aren't sexual, just the whole overwhelming vibe of this movie is so fucking horny. For Italian horror films.
Like look how sexy the bedspread is. Look how sexy this glove is. Look how sexy everything, the walls. Look at this wallpaper. It's sexy. Don't you want to lick the wallpaper?
I really don't know anything about what they're like in real life, but the fact that these two filmmakers, Helena Catat and Bruno Ferranzi,
you like how I made you say the French names? I just kept on not saying
I had to pull up the page to remember them, because I'm bad at remembering these two filmmakers' names. But the fact that they are a married couple makes it almost uncomfortably intimate when you watch the movies. You get the idea that you're watching their foreplay.
Yes,
their foreplay happens to be filmmaking.
Yes. Yeah, no, I mean, if we're talking about them in real life, I have a feeling that they're a little insufferable in real life, which...
Yeah, I
bet. As someone who fetishizes just Italian exploitation cinema, I have to say I don't love Amer was their first one. Amer, that one didn't quite hold together for me, and I actually didn't particularly like Let the Corpses Tan, which is more of a giallo with a little bit of spaghetti western and poliziotteschi thing mixed into it. That one to me had no message behind it. I feel kind of bad saying, like, I feel like I was supposed to like that movie and I didn't quite enjoy myself. I think this is their best movie by quite a bit, and I hadn't watched it for some reason. I think maybe I just couldn't find it. So I just saw this because you put it on your list.
Well, I'm happy that you did, because it's this kind of movie. I almost wonder if this seems like, because you are so sort of known to your friends as the Italian horror guy.
Yeah.
I wonder if it was like insisted that you watch this too much and that made you want to not watch it.
Probably. That sounds like something I would do. Yeah, okay, so some things this movie does. This movie has very little plot. It is a murder mystery, but like a lot of the most esoteric gialli, this puzzle is presented to the audience, and there's just no way to solve it. You have to let the movie solve it for you. And it's not really concerned with characters the way that some other kind of pastiches are, but that's okay because that's not what it's about. And then this one, even more than their other two movies, is very episodic at times. And I think that the stop motion, sort of stop motion assisted sequence where a woman is menaced by a disembodied killer who's wearing the costume of a giallo killer from like the classic '80s, the black hat and black trench coat and leather gloves. She's basically chased by the costume of a giallo killer and escapes into the wall and ends up masturbating to create her own giallo defenders, basically, to stop the attack. That sequence is maybe one of the best movies of the decade. Yeah. Like, you could just stick that sequence up on YouTube and make everybody watch that sequence. And I'm not saying you don't have to watch the rest of the movie, because there's a lot more stuff like that, but that sequence is so perfect. It's kind of what I would have wanted out of like those ABCs of Death movies.
Oh, yeah.
Which some of them are good, but like if, I don't know, G is for Giallo or something like that, that would have been perfect. I think that they actually did work on those now that I think about it. But
their short films are, I've seen two of their short films, and they were both done in that stop motion style.
Yeah.
So it's clear like the episodic nature is sort of an offshoot of them doing this sort of thing in that format.
I also think that these two rival Tarantino when it comes to reusing old soundtracks. They use the Killer Nun theme, sequence 4 of the Killer Nun soundtrack by Alessandroni. That's a cool song in itself. It's this guitar lick that kind of repeats over and over again. The way they use it in this movie, it's like it was written for this movie. It's so perfectly done. And then the other thing that happened here that I noticed was there's all these blink and you'll miss it references, so you can rewatch it. But the craziest one is that the protagonist, the guy who's trying to solve this crime, is cleaning his apartment, and he has an LP soundtrack for Belladonna of Sadness, which is a animated movie it's very roughly, like, there's very little animation because the studio ran out of money. It's Osamu Tezuka had made this trilogy of adult animated films in the 70s, and this was the last one, and they kind of ran out of money, but in a way it made it the best of the three. But that film is basically animated Art Nouveau, and so this movie is utilizing it's fetishizing Art Nouveau to the degree that it is looking for Art Nouveau influences even outside of Dario Argento or any of these Italian filmmakers. And at the time, Belladonna Citus had a re-release after this movie came out and kind of has picked up some steam in the kind of cult field. At the time, that was a fucking obscure movie. So that level of commitment was a really big deal to me.
That's the exact reason I wanted you to talk about this movie, because this is a movie that, for me, I'm just like, wow, this looks crazy. This is so cool. Like, I honestly, like, my love of this movie is super unsophisticated. I just think it's kind of spectacular looking and crazy, and I don't care about the rest.
I have a pretty sad art history background that, like, is really neglected and I ignore most of the time, but when something like that comes up and I recognize a style of art like say Deco or brutalism or whatever, and then I notice that the filmmakers are talking about the style of art, it's very exciting when it happens every once in a while. Excuse me, still getting over this cold. So then another one no one voted for but I think everybody liked is Under the Skin. Jonathan Glazer. I'm just assuming people didn't really think of this as a horror movie, and I respect that.
Yeah, it's like the part of it before you really get to know the main character, it's sort of like watching a monster movie from the monster's perspective.
Yeah.
But by the end of it is so not that it totally didn't even occur to me to include it, despite the fact that I think it's a fantastic movie.
Yeah, and so it's a movie that honestly is beyond me as far as describing what happened. It's like what was you mentioned your favorite probably movie period of the decade would be Upstream Color. Mm-hmm. And I think these two movies have that sort of inexplicable value to them. Though now I'm thinking about they're both very easy to describe. What happens in them? It's just it has this quality to it that makes it hard to talk about.
Under the Skin, I think, is exemplary because it sort of eschews a lot of the stuff that would go on to be sort of the art house horror staples, which is. It doesn't have a super easily digestible metaphor or message.
Right.
Though I will say my partner, who is non-binary, wrote an article about it on their blog, Panda Bear Shape. And if you search for the alien gender under the skin, you'll find that essay, and in which they related it to sort of a story of gender dysphoria, which I found compelling, but obviously when I was watching it as a cis male, it did not occur to me. There's a lot there. So it eschews that. It does not have super easily placeable touchstones in previous decades horror. Like, it kind of feels like there are certain 70s sci-fi films that it have that kind of feel, but there's no real easily identified pieces of it that are like, well, the music is like this thing, or this sequence reminded me of this. It just has that feeling to it.
I think it's sort of like if Nicholas Roeg would have made Species.
Yeah, Nicholas Roeg is a good example of.
It reminds me of the man who. It has a lot of The Man Who Fell to Earth in it. Sure. But then it's like core thing. First half of it is sort of like the movie Species, or there's one called The Prey about a male alien that comes down to Earth and in a human form and tries to impregnate people. It has that sort of really lowbrow narrative drive that is completely beside the point, but you could describe it that way. But then it has, the feel of The Man Who Fell to Earth or something like that.
And then it also has a lot of challenging material that is not challenging as far as, okay, here's a puzzle, try to work it out. It's challenging in terms of just very provocative choices, like the whole sequence that is more or less documentary, where they just had Scarlett Johansson drive around, and like basically allowed Scottish men to flirt with her as she from her car, and you just see these actual even if you didn't know the history of like how they made the film, like it's very clear that these sequences are not scripted. And the way they're slotted into the movie, it doesn't feel separate. It feels like a natural continuation, despite the rest of the movie being extremely sort of avant-garde and formalistic and not naturalistic in any way. The fact that it can slide into that. You have the man, and I forget the name of his physical deformity, but you have the sort of deformed man and her conversation with him.
Mm-hmm.
And the movie is simultaneously, it doesn't sort of play precious with who she is, and like it's not like, oh well, you know, he's different because he has a heart of gold, like, but at the same time it's also it's a choice that is provocative because you at least if you're a sort of quote unquote liberal sort of film viewer, you might sort of look at it and worry if is this being exploitative?
Which is exactly what I did.
and I mean, I ultimately land that it is not. Like,
no. I think there's a good interview with the actor that helped me on that, but
but so it's just a really interesting film in a lot of ways that even the other interesting horror films of the decade are not.
Yes.
And it did find an audience, I think, among the art house crowd. It does have a lot of followers, so I think because Jonathan Glazer is someone who only makes movies every like 14 years or something, like I feel like he doesn't really have the same following that other filmmakers who made movies that have been on this list have.
I think it's just because people didn't. I don't think people disliked it. I think people just didn't think of it as a horror movie like I did. Then I picked Green Room, which I think is another case of people just didn't think of this as a horror movie, because I know people like this one. To
be fair, I think everyone understands that this is a John Carpenter movie.
Yeah. And
it just depends on if you think Assault on Precinct 13 is horror, I guess.
Yeah, and that's a fine line. It's Assault on Precinct 13 with skinheads. It's particularly violent. Jeremy Saulnier makes particularly violent movies. There was part of me, this movie had a little bit of personal resonance with me, because when I was about the age these characters are supposed to be, maybe a little younger, I was in a punk band in southern Arizona where there was a thriving skinhead scene. This would have been in the mid-90s, the late 90s. And so I knew a lot of skinheads, and there was a weird thing in Arizona where a lot of them were the anti-racist kind, and you thought that was cool until you got to know them and you realized they were all just still shitheads. They were just against racism. But there's all sorts of little things in this movie that were like heightened versions of experiences I had trying to be around these people. And then they really, like, I don't know if the skinhead culture still works the same. It feels like all that racist culture has changed so much since I was a teen. But the scene where they say we got to get the red laces in here, that was something I immediately knew.
Oh, really?
The implication of that. When I thought it was kind of neat that the movie was willing to just not even explain to the audience what that meant, that they figured the audience would figure it out, and those of us who had been around those people would understand. I do want to make it clear, I was never a skinhead,
right?
Nor racist. I just was a teenager who was in a punk band. Actually, I was in a punk band at a time when ska was huge in Southern Arizona for some reason. I know it was big everywhere, but it was really big in Southern Arizona. There's lots of local bands, and skinheads love ska music.
Really?
Yeah. Especially at that time. So this movie resonated with me personally. I thought it was a good, tight movie. The cast is great. The story doesn't always make sense, but it's scarier than most straight horror movies in a lot of ways too.
Yeah, I think Jeremy Saulnier has a really good feel for sort of violent masculinity and like the subcultures that foster it.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what his story is or whatever, but I think it's a very well observed thing that sort of resonates in all of his movies.
This and Blue Ruin are definitely companion pieces. I have not seen Hold the Dark. But
I love Hold the Dark. Hold the Dark is a very messy movie, and there are parts of it that I think are sort of overreaching and don't quite work.
Yeah.
But it has an amazing bleak sort of tone, and I kind of love just like absolutely desperation, sort of nihilistic winter kind of stuff. I know, because exactly. I guess I have seasonal affective disorder, so like for me, winter always just makes me think of death, and that movie has an insane tone, and it has one of the best action sequences of the decade in the sort of assault on the house.
And that is that. Until next time, when we return to our standard single genre per episode coverage, you can reach me at genregrinder@gmail.com on the genregrinder.com website. on Genre Grinder's Facebook page, or on Twitter at either @GenreGrinder or @Gabe, M as in Matthew, Powers. I hope everyone listening has a great 2020.